Thank you, Brother Allen. Appreciate that very much. And I do recall last year and enjoyed it a lot. And let's see, what was that about? Great Escapes, wasn't it? Yep. I think that's what it was. Anyway, so good to be here. And let's see, can I see everybody? Pretty well. All right. I'd like to see you. Let's see. I was going to tell you something. I thought it was important. Anyway, thanks to Brother Allen for the good job that he's doing, and to all of these teachers and those that are registering and those downstairs, and for whatever anybody's doing, security, and there's so many people that are involved to make this a successful week. And so I appreciate everybody's help. Alan's spearheading a lot of things. He called me about these topics and asked me to pick one of them. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll pick David and Abigail. But I didn't know much about David and Abigail. And actually, I thought the assignment had to do with Abigail. And so I put a lesson together about Abigail for the most part. And then I heard Alan recently, a couple of weeks ago, he was really pushing something about David, and I talked to him, I said, Alan, I think I wrote the wrong thing. And I said, but it's kind of like going to the races, Dan. You got to run what you got, you know. And so I'm going to give you what I got, and there'll be some David, you know, in there. But thanks a lot. It's 1 Samuel chapter 25 is where we will be. Now, I want to begin by reading you something that I found when I started researching for this lesson. I found it from a man by the name of Alan Smith at the Cruciform Church of Christ. And it has to do with a newspaper article, and I just want to read to you what I found. I thought it was really interesting. In November 1985, Weekly World News reported that there was a very wealthy married couple in Switzerland who got into an argument. It started when the husband canceled a vacation. So husbands, be careful about that. His wife expressed her disappointment by pouring baking soda into her husband's fish tank, killing his entire collection of rare tropical fish. The husband responded by grabbing some of his wife's diamond jewelry and throwing it into the garbage disposal. She proceeded to lug his stereo equipment into their pool and throw it in. He threw the bleach into her closet and ruined all of her clothes. She threw yellow paint on his blue Ferrari. He kicked a hole in her Picasso painting. She sank his sailboat. At that point, their daughter arrived and called the police. But when the police arrived, they said they couldn't do anything because it isn't illegal to destroy one's own property. Eventually, the family lawyer was able to establish a truce between those two fools, a husband and a wife, who were in a downward spiral of pride, revenge, and destruction. Now, I share that story with you tonight because I think the story in 1 Samuel 25 also relates where two other fools met. And as much as we want to brag on David, and listen, I love that guy, okay? I mean, I'm named after him, right? No. But at any rate, he is my favorite Old Testament character. I'm telling you, he really dropped the ball, to a great extent in this chapter. And so we're going to flesh some of that out. But, at the end, he ended up, turning out, not so bad, okay? But David and a man by the name of Nabal, were spiraling down, into a very destructive path. But it was not a daughter that intervened to help them settle their dispute. It was Nabal's wife, Abigail. And she is the one that ended up settling the dispute because of her wisdom. Now, I've heard different people talk about this character, And I've heard them pronounce it different ways, Nabal, okay? And so I thought, well, I've always called him Nabal myself. And then I got to thinking, well, that might be Mississippi, for all I know, a pronunciation from my home state. And so I looked it up on the internet, one of those pronounce a name, deal and so forth. And guess what? The first pronunciation was Nabal. And I thought, surely his name was not Nabal. And then it had Nabal and so forth and so on. It was really kind of funny. But I've settled on sticking with what I've always referred to him as, namely Nabal. Now, at this point in the story of David, he's on the run. He's on the run from a jealous king, namely Saul. You remember that Samuel anointed David, where was that? 1 Samuel 16, I believe it was. And he's going to be the next king of Israel. Now, Samuel dies at this point. This is in verse number 1. Then Samuel died. And so you can only imagine what might be going through David's mind. I mean, Saul has already been trying, to slay him at different times. And so, but I think it was perhaps for the intervention of Samuel that he was not successful, to some extent at least. And now Samuel's dead. So what do you think's going through David's mind? I got to get out of Dodge, because the guy's after me. And so guess what he does? He takes 600 men and he heads south to a place called, Paran? I believe it is. In verse number 1, yes. And so that's where he is. All right, now let's begin to introduce the characters of our story. First character is Nabal. Now, Nabal is a businessman. He's a rich man. I mean, after all, the man's got 3,000 sheep, and he's got 1,000 goats. And so, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of sheep and goats to me. But anyhow, he's a very rich person. But he is also described as someone who is very harsh in his dealings, and he's an evil person, verse number 3. He is also referred to in verse number 17 as a scoundrel, and he's also referred to as a scoundrel in verse number 25. And finally, of course, his name, Nabal, means fool. Now, I wondered quite a bit about this. I couldn't help but think of, here's a mama who gives birth to a beautiful little baby. And she's holding him in her arms and looking into his brilliant face, Terry. And she says to herself, what shall I name this child? I think I'll name him Fool. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Does that make any sense to anybody? I don't think so. So my opinion is it's a nickname. Perhaps because of some of the dealings that he did or whatever, it's just speculation. But I don't think for a minute that his mama named him that. That's just my opinion. All right, now, the next character and sort of the heroine of the story is a woman by the name of Abigail. Now notice verse number 3. It says, she was a woman of good understanding and a beautiful appearance. So on the one hand, we got Nabal, who's harsh, he's evil in his dealings, he's a scoundrel, and he is called a fool. And on the other hand, we've got this beautiful woman named Abigail, who has good understanding, and there's the contrast that you have for you. Now, typically the marriages at this time, were arranged. And so I don't know if Abigail had any input on the marriage whatsoever. I doubt it. But here's a man who wanted a woman of good understanding and a beautiful woman, and guess what? He got her in the name of Abigail. Okay? All right. Now, let's see. That's verses 2 and 3. Okay. Let's look at verses 4 through about 9 or 11 or so. Now here's what's going on. Nabal and his men are shearing sheep, okay? And they are subject to to great harm and even death by other men, robbers and such, and also by some wild animals. And so they're in luck, however, and the fortune that they have is the protection of David along with how many men? 600 men, okay? Now notice what the Bible has to say, about David. Verse number 16, they were a wall to us both night and day. All the time we were with them keeping the sheep. Now this person that's doing the talking here is one of Nabal's young men. Now in verse number 21, now David had said, surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow has, in the wilderness. So the picture I'm trying to create for you is Nabal and all of these men that are shearing the sheep, okay? And they're out in this countryside, where they're subject to all kind of harm and danger. And but guess what? David has fled Saul. He's headed to the south. He's in the area, and he functions as a wall, between them and whatever harm might come toward them. So he has been a protector, for them. All right? Now, now here's the situation I want you to think about. Here's David and 600 men. Have you wondered how these people supported themselves? When they're in that situation. Larry, you ever thought about that? I mean, David's getting out of town, okay? And he has 600 men. Did he tell them all, y'all pack a lunch? Or did he put somebody in charge of getting all the things that they needed, in order to sustain themselves for some period of time? I don't know. But David is in the right because here's what he does. He makes this request of Nabal. In verse number 5, David sends 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, go to Nabal, and greet him by name, and thus you shall say to him who lives in prosperity, I already told you he's rich, peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Now I've heard that you have shearers, your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. So, what is David requesting? David is requesting essentially this. We would like some food, for having functioned as a wall between you and harm, and also for protecting you day and night for some period of time. That seems like a reasonable request to me. I mean, that makes sense. Well, guess what? It didn't go over too well with the fool, okay? Let's see. So this report is given to, as I just read, to Nabal. All right, now let's look at verse number 10. This has to do with his injustice. Now watch it. You ready? Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? Do you not think he already knew who he was? Everybody knows, that he's, the Lord's anointed. But here he is. Well, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from their master. So he just paints David as some kind of runaway slave, and does this in front of his men. Then look at verse number 11. This gives you an idea about Nabal. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I've killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? That doesn't go over very well. You can imagine it, right? How David must have felt, with that response. So David's young men returned and told him, what he said. So beginning in verse number 13, you'll see the indignation of David. So the young men come back. They give the report that Nabal gave them. They give the report to David. And then what's the first words out of his mouth? You ready? Every man gird on his sword. What's he saying? What's he saying? Somebody talk to me. Get ready for battle. Get ready for battle. Gird your sword. David also girded his sword, and he took 400 men. He left 200, with the supplies that they had. So here is David. He's put an army together of 400 men, all of whom have weapons. Has Nabal forgotten who David is? Has he forgotten that David is the one that, slew the giant, Goliath? Has he forgotten that? Is he the one that was not scared to walk out in front of the Philistines? Has Nabal forgotten that he's the one that the people said Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain what? 10,000? Has he forgotten, the havoc and so forth that David has, put on the Philistines, in their many battles? Apparently, we understand a little bit now why he's called a fool. Now, let me just say this about the person that we're studying this week. I don't think that this is David's finest hour right here. You guys gird your swords. Let's put this army together, 400 people. And let me jump over to, let's see, the other column in my Bible, where it says, verse 22, may God do so and more also to the enemies of David if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light. So he's ready, right? He's ready, for war. He's ready for this battle. He's ready to destroy Nabal and every male, that he has. All right, now, let's look at verse number 14. We're easing up on Miss Abigail, all right? Now, one of the young men, this is verse 14. You see it? This is Nabal's young man now. He tells Abigail, about what Nabal has done. He says, look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them. And we were in the fields, and they were a wall to us, and while we were keeping the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. Now, I found that kind of interesting, that this servant of Nabal, goes to his wife and basically says, your husband is a scoundrel and nobody can even talk to him. And that's the reason that I have come to you. Okay? Is everybody with me now? Yes, ma'am. Okay, for verse 17. Okay, the RSV says he's a worthless man. Thank you for jumping in there. Any other translations you'd like to share? Scoundrel is good. Worthless man. That's better. I like it. Anybody else? Worthless fool. What translation? Oh, okay. All right. Worthless fool. That's good too, because that capitalizes on the meaning of his name. Doug?
We're told that this young man goes to his wife. Do you think he's just anticipating what David's going to do? Or do you think he's somehow received word of what's going to happen?
Well, like you said, I think it's kind of hard to answer, that. I suspect that he probably knows pretty well what's going to come down. David is not the kind of guy, that you talk to, like that. What do you think, Doug?
Anticipating. I think he knows. He saw David, how David treated him.
Yeah.
But then also maybe he knows of David.
Yeah.
And maybe David has a reputation or whatever.
And well, he does have the reputation, but what gets me is not only does he refuse David's request, but he insults David. I mean, God's anointed in front of his own men. I mean, that's not good. All right, thank you, Doug. Anybody else?
For evil is determined against us. In other words, he knew David is not going to take this.
Right. Okay. Evil is determined against us. Good. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Possibility that he was drunk at this time.
Who, Nabal?
Nabal was drunk.
Well,
it says
he
later
gets
on-
drunk later. I really don't think he is at this point. I think he's just a bad person. You know, we already have learned he's an evil person. We've already learned he's a scoundrel. He's a worthless fool, and so forth. So I just think it's his character, you know, portraying itself at this point. Okay? All right, now let's see. So Abigail is informed about David's intentions. All right, now let's see. Let me try to do this next slide. Lessons from Abigail. So, Alan, I told you that's what I put together. But we got some David in here, don't we? Yeah. And besides that, as long as we learn something, right? All right, number one, be knowledgeable. I've tried to draw 5 or 6 lessons, you know, from this very lengthy chapter. You know, it's 44 verses long. Be knowledgeable. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm just trying to pick out some of her traits. Notice in verse number 3, it says she is a woman of good understanding. So she had knowledge, right? And let me tell you something else about her. She knows about her worthless husband. She knows that he's a fool. And she knows that her husband is arrogant. She knows that he's proudful. And you know, the very fact that he asked the question, who is this David? And who is the son of Jesse? And so forth. And so Abigail knew that, you know, he was soon to be king of Israel. And she knows all their lives are in danger because of her husband's, you know, stubbornness. And David is perfectly justified in asking for some payment, you know, for the protection that he and his men have been given Nabal and his shearers as they performed their duties in shearing the sheep. So here's what Abigail knows. She knows that the life of her husband is in danger. She knows that the lives of all of his servants are in danger. She essentially knows that, you know, David's got this army of men and that they're going to be wiped out. And so the young man goes to her. As I said, you know, he himself said, nobody can talk to your husband, essentially, because, you know, he's a scoundrel. But this young man of Nabal's camp apparently, you know, trusted Abigail and her wisdom and knew that she would do the right thing. So I think it was important, at least for me, to say she is a knowledgeable person. Is knowledge a good thing to have? You know the philosopher Francis Bacon? Remember what he said, Alan? I mean, I taught you 40 years ago. Y'all remember? Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. You know, the Bible places a great emphasis on knowledge. Hosea 4:1. God has a controversy with his people because there's no truth, there's no justice, there's no knowledge of God in the land. Verse number 6, my people are destroyed for lack of what? Knowledge. Hosea 6:6, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. And what about John 8:32, the big one? You shall, talk to me? Know the truth. And the truth will make you free. Thank you, brother. All right. So knowledge is important. It is so important that lack of it can cause disastrous consequences. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 8, you know, it said none of the rulers of this world knew it, for had they known, they would not have crucified, you know, the Prince of Glory. So knowledge is what crucified Jesus Christ, or lack thereof. Knowledge is important. You know, some people say ignorance is bliss. No, ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance causes destruction. All right, number 2. Any of you got a comment on that you'd like to make, add to it? Okay, let's look at verse number 18. This is lesson number 2 from our sweet person we're talking about here. Act quickly when needed. Well, I'll tell you what, I like this woman. I mean, she doesn't mess around, okay? When she's needed, Jill, she gets on the ball, okay? So let's see some evidence of that. Abigail is told about what happened and how her husband responded to David. And look what she does. Verse number 18, she made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on her donkeys. She didn't mess around. She knew, I've got to do something. I've got to do something to try to save, all of these men. Okay? Got a comment on that? So she got quite a bit, didn't she? All right. Now, notice something else here. She got all of this together, Brother Doug, by telling her husband or not telling her husband? Not telling Nabal. What do you think about that, girls? Y'all ever run in front of your husbands? We got any women here want to make a testimony? Miss Linda, you want to testify about that? Oh, he's sitting right there. I'm sorry. Okay. Whose husband is not sitting by? Oh, Jill, you're the one. I'm just asking if any of y'all run interference there, without telling your husbands. I mean, doing a good thing. Y'all are doing good things, and you don't run it by your husband. Oh, we got one over here. Oh, yeah, okay. I have heard that many times and actually used it a few times myself. All right, what about it over here?
Thinking that sometimes I think we see paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
We sit and think about stuff too long.
Right.
We want somebody to give us permission to do the right thing. And I don't think Abigail did that here. I think she said, hey, this is what we got to do. Doesn't matter what anybody else's opinion.
Well, just think about it, Brandon. What if she had asked Nabal about it?
He probably would have said no, and then everybody would
Yeah,
die.
I mean, he would say, have you completely lost your mind, woman? I mean, I just sent a message back, that I don't even know who he is, and so forth and so on, and I'm not sharing any of my stuff with him. Did you notice the number of times we saw the word my there in verse 11? All right. Okay, well, if none of you ladies are going to, give us a testimony on that, I'm going to assume that if you needed to, though, you would run ahead of your husband if you was doing it for the right reason. Is it okay to assume that? Some of you are kind of, Linda, you're a little, okay, all right. Oh, yeah, another Linda. Got 2 Lindas there. Yay. And 3 Lindas. I know Linda does. I know my wife does it. That's the reason I wouldn't ask her anything. Okay, hey, here's one over here. What about one of these girls over here? Oh, a couple of them bowed their heads there pretty quick. All right. All right. What about it, Miss Tracy? Maybe. Okay. All right. I like that.
This was a matter of life and death.
Yeah, that's what I'm screaming. I mean, something had to be done. Maybe. But what I find interesting here is not only is she protecting her crazy husband, okay, but she's looking out for all the servants, that are going to be slaughtered, by David and his men. Okay, so let's see. She got in a hurry, and it's a good thing that she did, because look at verse number 20. As she rode on the donkey, she went down under the cover of a hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. So what do you think about that? It's a good thing she sort of got on the ball, right? What if she hadn't? You see, David and his men, could have even been, and would have, been a little bit closer. All right? And okay, let's see. I'm trying to leave out some of this. Now, I found this interesting. We already know that she made haste in verse 18, In verse number 23, when she met David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey. Any of y'all ride horses or anything? Okay. I mean, she got off in a hurry, right? And then I noticed another place. So she dismounted quickly, but then over in verse number 42, she mounted quickly. I thought that was kind of interesting there, the way I picked up on that.
Yeah, donkeys aren't that big.
Well, I'm not talking about the donkey.
But it didn't take much.
I'm talking about Abigail. She got off fast and she got on fast.
But it didn't take much for her to get on and off.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara, for just blowing my point out of the water. All right, but why did she get on fast, as I just read?
We hadn't got there. She needed to do something right away, and she knew it.
I know it, but later on you're going to find she got on her donkey pretty quick because she had been asked. She had been asked to. Alan, tell us. To become his wife. Okay. That's of course after Nabal was. Well, I won't tell you. You can probably figure it out though. But at any rate, here's the point. Abigail had wisdom. She could see the big picture. She could see God's role in all of this. So she was wise. She gave David wise counsel. And her husband was just too, in my judgment, too stupid to understand really what was about to happen, to him and to his men. Okay, now.
Make any excuse for it.
Pardon?
She didn't make any.
No, she didn't. And I've got that later on, but that's okay. All right. All right, hang on. All right, number 3. Humble yourself so God will exalt you. Humble yourself so God will exalt you. All right, now this takes us back to where she got off that donkey pretty quickly, okay? And notice that the Bible says in 24, she fell at his feet and said, "On me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak to your ears and hear the words of your maidservant." So notice, what she does here. She falls on her face. I couldn't help but think of a few examples. Alan in Revelation, what did John do? Say it again.
Fell on the face before the angel.
He fell on his face. What did Ezekiel do? He fell on his face. What did Peter do when they had that? Wasn't that the occasion of the great catch of fish? And he said, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man." He fell at his feet. And so this is a very humble, act, to see on her part. She fell at his feet. And notice this, she took the blame. What do you think about that? She took the blame. See, as Linda Ms. Light, just said, she could have said, "You know what? That husband of mine, he's evil, he's a scoundrel, he's worthless. I've never been able to do anything with him, and it's about time, that somebody taught him a big lesson." She could have said that, but she didn't do that, did she? She didn't do any of that, whatsoever. On the contrary, what does she do? She says, "Let me have the blame." What do y'all think about that? What sense does that make?
I think she did that because I think David would have more pity on her than on Nabal.
Okay. All right. Everybody hear that? She thinks that she took the blame because David would have more pity on her than Nabal.
Because if she had said, my husband's, he's dumb, of course he would do, it would give him more reason to do what he was already planning on doing if she placed the blame on him than on her.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Anybody else? Anybody? Yes, sir, Brother Donald.
Well, she was willing to lose the battle to win the war, and I think we can learn a lot
Yeah.
from that. Nabal, he was always going to be the winner.
Yeah.
Whatever. But she was saying, "I'll take the blame," In the end, she was the real winner.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. She is willing to lose the battle to win the war. Isn't that good? You just came up with that? That's pretty good. I like that language. I wish I was smart enough to think of something like that. All right, very good. Anybody else? Anybody? Okay. All right. Now, if you think about it in our lives, sometimes a problem may not be our fault, or something that occurs may not be our fault. And I think that our tendency, as being human, might be something like this. Well, he needs to just own up to what he did. She needs to own up to what she said, or whatever. Have you ever found yourself in that circumstance? But sometimes the situation can be, if it's very tense and so forth, it can be abated if, we step up to the plate and just accept the, fault for ourselves. What do you think, Larry?
I think she's a very smart lady and she knew the situation.
Okay.
And that's why she basically said to David, you're bound up in the bundle of life. With
All right.
God's will is going to be done.
Okay.
She knew what God's will was.
Right.
She was trying to protect David from making a mistake that he would regret all his life.
Okay, very good. What if you're working in a store and let's say there's some kind of spill on the floor? Well, it's not my shift to do the mopping. Jimmy Joe needs to own up to that and get that spill cleaned up. Or do you think it might be better to humble yourself and go get a mop and clean it up? What about that? See, to me, that's accepting. See, you're taking the blame. You're accepting it, Barbara.
Before somebody slips in it.
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, see, you could have someone slip, they fall, they could sue the store could go out of business, and on and on and on. So sometimes I think it's necessary for us to do that. Have you ever found yourself? It's like apologizing. It's like this. You find yourself apologizing for something, some kind of miscommunication, when the communication has been incredibly clear, but you apologize for it anyway. You see, it's taking on the blame. And she does that. She takes the blame. She says, put it on me. And why would she do that?
David,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a nephew that anytime our family gets together, something goes wrong, my fault. He's always saying it's his fault. And you'd be surprised how that can change the attitude of people
Really?
right now. It's
Just-
whatever
so it
happened is forgotten.
Changes the dynamics in the family, huh? Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Hey, Brother David,
Yes, sir, Brian.
I think in 25, when Abigail says, basically, don't regard Nabal, she's saying, don't pay attention to it. It is an application, in my mind, of James 4, where it talks about humble yourself
Yeah.
and submit, and then the devil will flee from you. She was contrasting to David, good versus evil.
Right.
If you do this, you're going to sin.
Right.
There's a lot of courage there, and I think he received it well because
Right.
he understood. But she was to the point that she was going to do the right thing, no matter the consequence.
Yeah, and so see, it says a whole lot for her because she's going to serve the Lord. Okay? I had that actually in my notes. James 4:6 is the verse that he referred to, and also 1 Peter 5:5 and 6. Okay? All right, let's look at the next one real quick. Influence as many as you can. Influence as many as you can. Our words and our actions are powerful. Is that right? We can influence by our words and we can influence by our actions. I don't know if any of you are English literature buffs. I know probably what you're thinking. He's from Mississippi. He wouldn't care anything about that, but I quite frankly, enjoyed that in college. And I've memorized several lines from some of the plays. In particular, Shakespeare's play on Othello. He said this: "He who steals my purse steals trash. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, has been that of thousands. But he who flitches from me my good name robs me of that which does not enrich him and makes me poor indeed." What's he saying? If you take my pocketbook, you get what belongs to a lot of people, okay? But if you hurt me, if you hurt my name, then what? You really have hurt me. Destroying somebody's reputation?
And it doesn't do you any good
No.
because people usually don't like someone who destroys another person.
Yeah, robs me, it does not enrich him at all. Okay, well, I wanted to go a little deeper on that. 2 Corinthians 3 and 2, you are an epistle written in our hearts, known and read of all men. I just use that as an introduction to Abigail. She understood the big picture. She knows 3 things about David. Let's look at let me skip down to verse number 28. "Please forgive the trespass of your maidservant." Here's what she knows about David. Number 1, she knows that God is going to establish his kingdom. See the enduring house. Number 2, she knows that he fights the battles of the Lord. Number 3, he knows that evil is not found in you throughout your days. What about that particular point? She says, here's a situation Abigail faces. She says, okay, on the one hand, I got the, foolish decision of my husband, Nabal, okay? On the other hand, I've got the Lord's anointed. I've got, David. And so look at the wisdom that she exercises, to support David. All right, next, we got to quit. Think of others before yourself. This takes us down to verses 30 and 31. 30 and 31. Abigail fought to protect her own husband, as foolish that he was, anyway, and her own house. She was not thinking about herself, but she is thinking about, all of her household. She was loyal. She honored God. She chose to show respect towards David and reminded him that God would bring to his life blessing. And with this wisdom and discernment, she asked David for only one thing. What did she ask him for? She says, end of 31, "Remember your maidservant." All right, David says to Abigail, "Blessed is the Lord God of Israel who sent you this day." So see, David charges God with the responsibility, of sending Abigail, to intervene between him and Nabal. Barbara?
Most of the battles that happened with the Israelites and stuff, and with David, they went to God first before they went to him.
Right.
And this time, David was ready to go. He didn't even ask God
Yeah.
about what he thought.
Like I said, it's not his finest moment, but he's beginning to see the picture now, isn't he? Can't y'all see a change, coming over him? "And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you." So see, he's saying here, God has kept me back from hurting anyone, but based on whose intercession? Based on Abigail's intercession. All right? Let's see. And so he says in verse 35, "Go up in peace to your house. I have heeded your voice and respected your person." All right. So Abigail, let me summarize it. She's going to, tell Nabal about it, but she goes home and what's his situation? He's drunk. Okay? So see, look at the wisdom. I'm not going to talk to him tonight. I'll tell him tomorrow. Okay? He may have a hangover, but I'm going to tell him tomorrow. Okay? And so she tells him the next day, and notice what the Bible says on his part. It says that his heart died within him and he became like a stone. I take that to mean, Brother Coy, that he was very afraid. And then what happened 10 days later? 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Okay, when David heard about that, he sent a servant to her and asked for her hand in marriage. And that's where she made haste and became David's wife. All right, I have one other lesson real quick. And, well, I just went over God fights for us, but here's my last lesson. And this is nowhere in the text whatsoever. So we're through with 1 Samuel 25, okay? But as I studied this, I thought about this point. Be careful who you marry. That make sense? I mean, more than likely, Abigail didn't have any say in the matter, at this time. But that's not the way it is for us today, is it? So as parents, grandparents, can we suggest to our children and our grandchildren, be careful who you marry. You marry a fool, and you're going to get Nabal stuff. You marry an evil person, you marry a scoundrel, you marry a proudful person, an arrogant person, a haughty person like Nabal, and the consequences are not going to be good. So be careful who you marry. Okay, here's my concluding statement for us, and the lesson will be yours. The story of Abigail is a great example of a woman with good character who acted with wisdom. May we all be like her and find favor in the eyes of God, our family, and our community. David is an example of a heeding heart. See, I finally got Alan's title in my lesson. who listened to good advice and was able to save himself from ruining his own reputation and causing hurt and death to many people. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
David's zeal for God. Don't you suppose that where he had the zeal, even for Saul, as Saul was chasing him, wanting to kill him, and he had those opportunities, and he didn't want anybody even harming Saul because Saul was anointed of God. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that he might have thought, well, I'm the anointed of God as well. He's disrespecting God and disrespecting me in my own way. Could it not be his zeal working in him right there?
Yeah.
The zeal for God that he had because they were disrespecting the chosen
Yeah.
God.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Saul, though anointed, was very disobedient, of God, wasn't he? Yeah, and you remember that episode where maybe it was Russell that talked about it. I can't remember where David, snipped that, part of Saul's garment. He got that close to him and he could have killed him, but David maintained his respect for him. Okay, anybody? Thank you, Doug. Anybody else? Thank y'all. You've been a great audience. Appreciate you listening.